Let's talk about your visit to Washington. You spent some time, as Taoiseachs tend to do this time of year, with the president, with President Trump, and with Vice President Pence this morning. What was your main takeaway from that visit?
Yeah, well, first of all, happy St. Patrick's Day. It's great to be here in New York. Looking forward to joining the parade tomorrow. Ireland has a unique asset in that our National Day, St. Patrick's Day, is celebrated all over the world. My ministers, members of my government, are out celebrating all over the world and telling people the story of Ireland. And I'm delighted to be here in the United States. So, as you said, last 2 days we're in Washington, D.C., an opportunity to meet the President, Vice President, Speaker of the House, and some cabinet secretaries and leaders in Congress. And really what I was talking about in the main was the extent to which the relationship between Ireland and America now is one that is a very strong bilateral relationship economically and politically. So everyone knows that a lot of American firms invest in Ireland. What a lot of people don't know is there are now 500 Irish firms that have invested in the US, employ 100,000 people across 50 states, and we've €2 billion worth of trade crossing the Atlantic every week and going in both directions. We've a trade surplus when it comes to merchandise. The US has a trade surplus when it comes to services, and it pretty much balances out. So we want more jobs, more trade, and more investment between our two countries.
So more trade. Trade obviously has been a huge topic in this country, and because of that, globally, owing to the tariffs that the president has spoken about, were you less optimistic, more optimistic about global trade coming off of these discussions?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more optimistic going home than I was when I arrived, although certainly not complacent. I think the president means what he says in terms of imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum. But I did detect a real openness from the administration and also on the Hill to re-engaging with the European Union around the possibility of a free trade agreement. Maybe not a TTIP as it was planned, but a new bilateral agreement between the European Union and America on trade. And I certainly would prefer us to have a trade agreement rather than a trade war, which is the alternative. And I think everyone would lose from that.
And what would a trade war look like from an Irish perspective? How does that play out in your estimation?
Well, I think from an Irish point of view, it would essentially be tit for tat. We don't produce steel. We do produce aluminum, but very little of that actually gets exported to the United States. But if that goes ahead, then there's a risk, obviously, of retaliation from the European Union. And bear in mind, the European Union is a big market, 500 million people. It's a bigger market than the United States. And you could see, for example, there's been suggestions that there could be tariffs put on Harley Davidsons and bourbon and denim jeans. And no doubt then the US would have to respond by putting tariffs on other European products. So you just get to the point where everyone is exchanging sanctions on each other, and you end up with less trade and less jobs and less investment, and that's definitely not good for Ireland, and I don't think it'd be good for America either.
And as you think about Europe, obviously Brexit is very much top of mind. Some big meetings coming up next week, and the border issue has become, maybe as a surprise, one of the really key issues, the border with Northern Ireland. What needs to happen next?
Yeah, well, Brexit is obviously a huge concern for Ireland. It's not our policy, it's a British policy, but we are very much affected by it. Even though the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union, we're not. We're staying in the EU, we're in the Eurozone, we're in the single market, and there's over 80% support for Europe in Ireland, so we're staying put. But we want to make sure that whatever new relationship exists between the EU and the UK is one that is close and first of all doesn't damage our economy and doesn't damage the peace process in Northern Ireland, because part of the reason why we have a peace agreement, the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, agreed 20 years ago, was because the European Union swept away all those borders and turned the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland into something similar to a border between two US states. And we don't want to go backwards. We think that would be bad news for Ireland, for Northern Ireland and for Britain. So we're working on solutions that first of all protect something called the Common Travel Area, which allows British and Irish people to travel freely between each other's countries, work in each other's countries, access welfare, housing, pensions. That's pretty much agreed and nailed down now.
So you think that will stay, and you're less concerned about that?
Yeah, that part is the Common Travel Area. It's written into the draft withdrawal agreement without getting too technical about it, and nobody has a problem with that. So that's 99% done, if you like. What we don't yet have is a sort of nailed down legal text on the border. Now, everyone says that they want to avoid a hard border. The British government says that. That's absolutely our hard line, red line position, and we have 27 EU member states behind us. But we need to agree a mechanism now and write it into law to do that. And there are ways that it can be done. And that's really going to be a big focus of our negotiations over the next couple of weeks and months. And then also on agreeing a transition period, because the United Kingdom will leave the EU around this time next year. But businesses and people are going to need time to adjust to any permanent changes. So we're talking now about there being a transition period running through till the end of 2020 when very little will change, and that'll give people time to prepare. And that's something that we need as well.
And on the border issue specifically, you're going to see Prime Minister May next week, I believe, and some of these negotiations or discussions are going to continue. What do you need to hear from her that will give you confidence that this is moving in the right direction?
Well, what we've already heard from her is a commitment from the United Kingdom that there won't be a hard border on the island of Ireland, and that's contained in a political agreement we made back in December. What we now need is to have that written down in a legal form that's enforceable. And there's two ways it can be done. It can either be done through a very close trading relationship between the UK and all of Europe, something very similar to the single market and the customs union. They said they're leaving both of those things, but perhaps we can negotiate a new partnership between the EU and the UK that replicates a lot of that. Or if that can't be done, to put in place some special arrangements, some special treatment for Northern Ireland, so they obviously remain part of the United Kingdom, but don't lose the benefits of European Union membership. And we have that written down in a legal text now. All 27 member states are behind Ireland in promoting that as a solution, and that is a potential solution. We call it the backstop solution, but we're willing to explore better solutions if the UK is able to come up with them.
And it does feel like this is largely about customs, right? I mean, and the ability, as you said, to trade freely. What happens if you can't get there?
Yeah, well, it's predominantly about customs, but also there are aspects of the single market as well that are important, in terms of regulatory alignment. I think we can get there. I think everybody wants to get there, and certainly, in my position as Taoiseach as Prime Minister of Ireland, I can't really contemplate a return to a hard border on our island. That would be just such an enormous step backwards for citizens in all parts of Ireland, for our economy. And I'm working really hard with my ministers, with my government, and with the other 27 member states to make sure that doesn't happen.
Staying with Brexit briefly, as the transition gets closer, obviously there's been a lot of speculation, especially in the world of investment and banking, that Dublin could be maybe a mild beneficiary of some of the outflow of talent or headquarters from London. Are you seeing any evidence of that yet? And what are you doing to maybe draw some of that in?
Well, we're seeing some evidence of it. A lot of big companies, a lot of financial institutions, banking, insurance, they want to have a base in Europe. London and Britain no longer offer that possibility, but we do. We're English speaking, we're in the Eurozone, we have a very pro-business culture. Very American model of doing business in many ways, even though we're totally European. So we've seen, some companies taking the decision to move their EU entity to Dublin. For example, Bank of America is doing that. Toronto Dominion from Canada is doing that too. S&P are going to open a base in Dublin. And also we want those companies as well to look at other parts of Ireland as well as potential for investment. On the downside, of course, we have real concerns about how Brexit might impact on our agri-food sector. And also on small business, because they're much more dependent on trade with the United Kingdom than the big companies would be. So that's obviously something of real concern to us too. But we're working on that as well, and we see our companies diversifying a lot more, and the government is working with companies to enable them to diversify and become less dependent on the British market and do more with the Eurozone, more with America, more with China, and we're seeing some success in that already.
One of the means by which you have been attracting companies over the last several decades is through taxes. It's been very favorable for a lot of global companies, especially tech companies. Given what's happened with U.S. tax reform, as it were, are you seeing any immediate impact, and what do you see going down the road in terms of your ability to use tax as a recruiting tool?
Well, our position on tax is that we have a very simple low corporate tax rate of 12.5%. That's been there for decades. while other countries are now lowering their taxes to compete with us, and we've no problem with that. You know, you can't benefit from competition and then be against other people competing with you. I think what we offer that other countries don't is real policy consistency on that. Our 12.5% corporate tax rate, it's not going up, it's not going down, and all of the major parties, all the major political parties support it. So even if there's a change of government, that policy and that tax rate won't change. And that means if you're making a 20-year decision or a 30-year investment, you can bank on the fact that in Ireland we'll continue to have that low corporate tax rate. But it's never been the case that companies come to Ireland just because of our low tax rate. Other European countries, Hungary for example, already has a lower rate than we do, and we won't be chasing them downwards. So we have to offer other things. One of the things we offer is a really good talent pool, a good education system. If you want to bring in key workers from overseas, if they have the skills, it's quite easy for you to do that. And also we have that access to the single market in the Eurozone.
And do you think that companies will be reluctant to either come or expand, given that, say, in the United States, they can get a lower tax rate than they had before?
I think certainly any companies that already have significant bases in Ireland are going to keep them, and some of them may even expand. And I think companies, you know, particularly large companies, multinationals, they're always going to want to have a foothold, a base and a serious operation somewhere in Europe and in the Eurozone. And Ireland offers, I think, a really good potential location to set up your base in Europe. And I think more and more, particularly with the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, Ireland can become a bridge between America and the European Union in a way that perhaps Britain was in the past, but we can be in the future.
Great. One last question for you. What's the economic story that investors and bankers and business people most need to know that maybe they don't about Ireland at this moment?
I hope they know already, but if they don't, Ireland is a pro-enterprise, free trade, pro-business country. It's a country with an abundance of talent, a really good workforce, a country that is at the heart of Europe, in the Eurozone, English speaking, and has a competitive tax rate, and we're a really good place to invest.